Council meeting for 30 June 2015 is now open. Okay, first item on the agenda, apologies. I have no apologies for today. Second item...
Councillor McPherson for lateness.
Okay, moved by Councillor Gallagher, seconded by myself.
And Councillor Wilson.
And all those in favour?
Apologies from
Yes,
Councillor
carried.
I think Martin had, did you get...
yes, Councillor McPherson and Councillor Wilson. Confirmation of the agenda, Councillor, it is as is, but I will like to add another item onto the agenda, item 9, update on Riverley Theatre sale. So with that additional item, I'll move the agenda, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. All those in favour?
Aye.
Any against? Carried. Declarations of interest. Councillor King.
Item 8.
Sorry?
Item 8.
Item 8. Okay, thank you. Noted. Right. Public forum not required. Council minutes, item 5, page 5. These are the minutes for the meeting held on the 4th and 5th of June. I'll move, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Forsyth wished to make a statement on the minutes. I'm going to go to her. And Councillor Mallett, did you have an item you wished also to
just
raise?
a question, but Mark can go first.
Okay.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I wish to make a personal statement in response to the minutes that we're recommending at the council meeting on Friday the 5th of June, and my dissenting to the apologies. I entered the meeting a few minutes late and sat down as the vote was being taken. I missed the preamble leading up to as I cast my vote. I realised soon after that I'd made an error. When I sought advice from the democracy manager to change my vote, I was advised that the most appropriate way to change or to correct that error was to deal with it during the minutes which would be taken at today's meeting. So that's the action I'm taking today.
Right, okay. Thank you very much for that statement. Now, Councillor Mallett, did you have a question on the minutes?
On page 8, first bullet point talks about the submission process and says the second... So it starts off with the submission process was wider than da-da-da. Third sentence, the only change for this 10-year planning process was the way that people spoke to and presented in person to council. Well, no one presented in person to council, did they? We spoke, people presented at those gatherings we had, but no, that wasn't council.
So your...
Well, I guess that implies that we had hearings. We didn't have hearings.
No, it doesn't say that. So are you saying in terms of the way that sentence is written, you're taking issue with the word presented in person?
Yes,
right?
well, it implies that, well, it seems to me that it implies a process that didn't occur. And I'm not trying to play politics, I'm just trying to get things accurate, because we did change our submission process. And that the submission process was foregone this time, and we had the community meetings. Where some councillors attended, some didn't.
Okay,
rotating number of councillors. So just community meetings or something. Just
so
change the wording.
What you're saying is the minutes maybe need some clarity. So would this suffice? The only change to this 10-year planning process was in the way that people spoke and presented in person to the council, comma. This was done through engagement meetings held in the community.
Well, it wasn't to the council.
No, you're working.
Yeah, well, I guess...
I'm talking to Councillor Mallett.
Thank you, Your Worship.
That
council to me implies a formal process.
So let's get the solution here. What do you suggest the word say?
And the word you might have some problem with is the word informal, but informal community meetings, which I think is what we had, because there was no standing orders, there was lots of things that weren't the council. They were more like, they were pretty much a town hall meeting.
Yeah, so where's Blair? Blair, you have taking on board the point about presented in person to the council. Do you have some suggestions about a wording that might better reflect the process, which is a the matter of public record in reports and resolutions in any event. But do you have some wording that perhaps might reflect that a bit better? We're talking on page 8, first bullet point, second sentence.
Third sentence.
Third sentence, sorry.
Particularly the end of the sentence, Blair, where it says presented in person to the council, which to an outsider, that would, I think, people would think, oh, this. But we're talking about
Yes.
town hall meetings or community.
Spoke and discussed their submission with representatives of council.
Yes, there we go. Does that how does that sound, Councillor Knight?
Yeah, so long as it's not, the word informal, I think, is important.
So just repeat those words, thanks,
Spoke
Blair.
and discussed their submission with representatives of the council.
Why don't we say at the community engagement sessions?
So Councillor Mallett, how do you...
Yeah, something like that's okay, so long as it doesn't make it sound like someone in 100 years from now looking at and thinking
So
that these
Jude,
were...
just those words, would you like to read those
People will
back?
be looking back on us.
Would you like to
What,
read those words?
what I think I'm hearing is the only change for this 10-year planning process was the way that people spoke and discussed their submissions with representatives of the council at community engagement meetings.
Councillor
Yeah, so
Mallett,
long as it's
that?
made quite clear that there were no formal hearings for this consultation process.
Okay, so Councillor Mallett, are you happy, do those words sort of...
Yep.
They're good for you?
They're close enough, yep, thank you.
Okay, I mean, I'm happy to include that change. So that's Councillor Mallett's point. Councillor Gallagher?
Yes, I think it's important that there's a sentence that there's a reference to the past historical practice. There's not judging which one's better or worse in the past, and I'm sure Jude and Blair would, in the past, submissions have been made in a formal setting to whole council, subject to standing order, something along the lines. Because in other words, this was the tabletop engagement versus a previous practice, which was organisations making formal submissions to the whole of council. So I just think one sentence, just so you've got context, so that refers to a previous practice. This will be useful in a year or two's
Thank you,
time.
Councillor Gallagher. So, Blair, an additional sentence that said something like, in contrast to the past, formal hearings have been held in front of the council.
That's fine, yes.
That additional sentence would take that point up, wouldn't it?
And I think
Okay, have you got that, Jude? Thank you.
just to councillor's note, we are commencing the process of the formal review of the long-term plan, and we are intending at this stage to, in the July briefing, if we can capture the time there, to include a session to capture the councillor's feedback on this particular process, so that the
Okay,
greater comments such as
No,
this will be
no.
captured.
So
right,
through the
Councillor,
through the chair, all I'm wanting is that this is picking up Councillor Mannett's point.
Yes,
When
so Councillor
historians look at
Gallagher,
this, this is,
we've
if I
picked
may
that up,
finish.
and we've added another sentence in that I'm going to ask Jude to read back that picks up your point. So let's just go to Jude now.
A second bullet point following the change bullet point on the top of page 8 would read something along the lines, this engagement process was in contrast to the past where submissions have been made to the full council, have been made via hearings to the full council meeting.
Okay.
Something along
Councillor
those lines.
McPherson, did you have a question on this?
I had a point in relation to that as well, in respect of Councillor Mallett, the change that arose out of his discussion, when it's Blair's wording was ended with representatives of council. Now, there were at least a couple of occasions where I noticed that people were speaking to tables that only had staff on because councillors had to go, so I would rather it read something like representatives of council and staff, because the implication, even though technically it may not be the case, but the implication to the layperson is that those were elected councillors always receiving it, which wasn't always the case.
Look, I'm pretty confident, Councillor McPherson, that certainly wasn't my observation. Blair, do you have a comment on that? You attended every one of the meetings.
From my observations, there was always a councillor present.
Always.
Staff member at any particular table. So we're very conscious of There may have been moments where council had moved away, but certainly that would be an exception, not the law.
Yeah, I totally accept that it was the exception, but it did happen, for instance, at Western Community Centre. There were 5 tables set up, if I remember rightly, and there were 7 councillors there, but not all of them were there for the whole time. I mean, it's not a big issue, but it goes to the nub of some of the community complaints about the process.
So I think I think the adjustments that have been made to the minutes, we'll accept those, or subject, of course, to the voting. But perhaps that's a matter that you can raise in your feedback, Councillor McPherson. I'm going to ask Blair to check with his staff on the presence of councillors or not at tables, because I attended every meeting and I did not observe that at all. So if that was an observation, you will need to check that at the Western Community Centre. Okay, so could you just read back then bullet point 1 on page 8?
The submission process was wider than in previous years. Submissions were also received via the usual communication channels. The only change for this 10-year planning process was the way that people spoke and discussed their submission with representatives of the council and presented in person at community engagement meetings. And then a second bullet point. This was in contrast to the past where submissions had been made to the full council via hearings.
Okay, so with those changes, the minutes have been moved and seconded. I'm going to now vote. All those in favour? Are there any against?
Yes.
Councillor McPherson is against. Okay, thank you.
Just the pronunciation of via, it's via.
Right, next item is item 6, page 22, which is the development contributions policy.
Not in Italy, Gary. Not in Italy.
Oh, okay. Viva. Allez, français.
Right, are there any particular comments you wish to make, Blair?
Just a couple of brief comments, Your Worship. Good morning, councillors. So, under the Local Government Act, Council must adopt a development contributions policy which is linked to the 10-year plan capital expenditure program. This is the policy as presented in the documents to you today. The draft policy that was subject to public consultation has had changes made to it. They were as discussed on the 4th and 5th of June, and those are identified in the report in terms of substantive changes. These include removing the PPI index adjustment, correcting some allocation of costs related to sports parks, which were raised through submissions, additional explanations to the policy, and making parts of the policy easier to read, all elements raised through the submission process. You'll also note attached to the report is the independent assurance report by PricewaterhouseCoopers, which identifies that the development contributions model itself has high accuracy, is very sophisticated, complies with the Local Government Act, and reflects sound economic principles. So it provides a high level of assurance over the model, the engine room of the development contributions themselves. Also attached is a proposed working group for the development contributions and growth policies to commence in the new financial year. This is a forum for discussion with the development community over a range of issues identified through the submission process on the development contributions and growth funding policy. And you'll note that the terms of reference identifies various phases, and at the end of each phase there would be a report back to the Strategy and Policy Committee to seek further clarification and direction from Council. Your Worship, Councillors, the amendments to the policy are outlined in detail in the report in section 32, and you'll also note in section 38 of the report that the development contribution charges, the final charges in the policy identified, also showing how they, in all cases except one area, are lower than those in the draft policy, and this is in relation to matters raised through the submission and also the Pricewaterhouse assurance work, the lower interest rate that we've used in the final versus the draft, and also some further testing of the model. So happy to take any questions on the development contributions.
Thank you. Councillor Mallett?
Thanks, Blair, and thanks, Greg. you say Price Waterhouse have undertaken a review of the model, and you say they made some recommendations. Is there a time, is it appropriate to tell us what those recommendations are, or are they minor things? And secondly, what's the timetable for the implementation of those recommendations, and what would be the process for those recommendations being approved or not?
So a number of those recommendations were minor matters which were addressed concurrently to their review, so they were part of the adjustments to the model. So as they were going through their process, they were making minor recommendations and they were picked up. There are other matters which will be referenced to the working group, and the working group can discuss those as part of their more substantive discussion on development contributions generally. And they were observations around things such as the number of catchments that we have in the policy, as an example.
So how do you, so they made a recommendation saying that you've got your two types of the catchments, or you could have one catchment called the city, or you could have a catchment all over the place. What's the process for that?
So what they did, they made observations, as Blair said, and they noted that the complexity, or the complexity in the model was largely driven by the number of catchments, which was driven by the development community in the last review. So they haven't recommended any changes to the catchments. They've just noted that that's that the impact that has. The only recommendation they made that needs to be addressed subsequently, or that we'd look at through a subsequent review, but also address it in the working party, is around our capacity recovery period. So we recover over a maximum period of 30 years, and and that's been accepted as a suitable way to do it. But they suggest across HUEs, so you recover over only the remaining HUEs, which itself has some complications. But we kind of agree that is probably a more accurate way to do that recovery. So that's something we'll look at, but as too sort of fundamental to the model to deal with it, just prior to this adoption. But all other, recommendations, tweaks or other observations that were made in the report have been included and are now part of the model that informs these charges.
Okay, thank you. On paragraph 31 talks about legal advice confirms that the policy complies with the Local Government Act requirements and is legally robust. What kind of things are considered there? Because I think we're all aware that there's talk of challenges and whatnot.
So key things that were looked at is charge caps. So there's a mechanism through the LGA, section 1013B, which allows council to consider community impacts, which is the filter that allows council to do that. So that was...
So charge cap is when you say, although the cost at such and such should be $50,000 per section, that just makes it too expensive to develop out there, so the maximum we'll charge is, say, $35,000.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the non-residential caps on charges. And then the legal review just goes through the just all the provisions. So, obviously you can't write into the policy something which would then be non-compliant with the LGA. So that's the basic form of a review. And then, there's the report, the legal report we get back is 4 or 5 pages long, and Lachlan and his associate, are very familiar with the policy. So they've sort of, through the last 4 or 5 years, they obviously they can identify any potential issues, and they've done that. And we've made, whatever amendments are necessary, based on that advice as we go along.
Okay, and thank you, Greg. And the last thing I wanted to ask about was on 62, talking about a list of risks there, and it talks about losing, and I know you're going, talking about key staff, and I don't think you'd be considered key staff at all.
No.
But for, that was meant with tongue in cheek.
I was going to say, it's a little nasty.
It's fine.
That in an organisation this big, for something that is as fundamental and core to our activities as development contributions, I find it a little surprising the suggestion that we don't have backup, or that we might have to get third party. Now I know for specialist situations like the legal thing, maybe you haven't got them, but this is kind of like tar sealing roads. We should have the ability to do that, and because I assume it's because Greg and hypothetically future people move on, it would surprise me that we don't have a succession planning or some sort of scenario whereby we
What's
are
your
robust
question,
and
Councillor
secure in
Mallett?
that.
What's your question?
That's it.
So,
Well, I think that was a statement I used. Your question is, do we have sufficient depth?
Well, I've just
in
said,
the
why
study?
is this a risk? Surely we should have that covered.
If you've identified it as a risk, do we have it mitigated?
we are in the process, and we have mitigations, but we've acknowledged it because it is a risk. So through the Chief Executive and myself, we've been spending a lot of time focusing on the resourcing of development contributions into the future, also acknowledging that we have a big working party process about to commence. So there are a number of mitigations. We have seconded a staff member across into Greg's role, and he's been working alongside Greg now for the last couple of weeks.
So that's within the organisation?
Within the organisation. Greg is also going to be contracting back to us for a period of the next 5 months, part-time, to provide that ongoing level of assurance into the process. With the Chief Executive's new organisational structure, there is going to be additional focus put into development contributions as part of that exercise. We're also working through a process to how we can de-risk our development contributions model in terms of the IP and the speciality around that particular model itself. It's currently looked after by another staff member, and there's a lot of knowledge and expertise tied up in that particular staff member with regards to that model, and we need to find a process.
That's great.
Longer term risk process around that in terms of how we can potentially maintain and update that model, but not be so reliant on one particular staff member. So that's a process we're starting as well.
So what did PwC say about that? Did they raise that, or is this just...
They acknowledged that as part of their process, and part of the reason we engaged PwC was because we wanted to start this process to understand the complexity of the model, to understand how we could actually reduce the risk around one person being so closely involved with that particular model, hence the reason PwC got involved.
To sort of use an aeroplane analogy, it's like not having a co-pilot. It just surprises me that for something so fundamental, we're not talking about something that we only do once every decade. It's something we're doing all the time with regard to developers and developments and these big DC levy things. Just surprises me we don't have the infrastructure or the capacity. Well,
yeah. Can I just add a comment to that, Councillor Mallett? You're
maybe I'm over-reading what's in here.
No, I think you're making a fair observation, and it probably reflects the lean nature of council in terms of the available resource. But we have acknowledged that even before the PwC report, we did acknowledge that we needed to ensure there was some resilience, because that's what you're talking about. And, I just want to back it up.
And understanding of how the thing works.
Yep. Yeah. And so we've got a couple of layers of resilience, including the contract with Greg to continue on a part-time basis. We've also, like to mention, that seconded staff coming across, but also we work really closely with the development contribution administrators and the team that actually administer it have become very familiar with policy and so forth. We've been doing a lot of work in terms of documentation, in terms of decisions and so forth. So that standard operating procedure we've developed as well. So you're right to raise it. We think we've got adequate mitigations in place. We'd like to be in a position where we could have number of layers of resilience, but budgets don't allow that. We're doing the best we can. In my proposed structure, which is currently out for consultation, I'm talking about an increased focus on development contributions and the modelling that comes from it. I'd like to be able to bring back to council some more robust modelling about the impacts of increasing and decreasing development contributions on demand and so forth. So that would mean that we need to focus in that area a little bit more, and so I've freed up some resource in other areas to enable that focus as well. So it's something we'll continue to focus on. It's right to raise it, but I think we have got adequate mitigation in place, Councillor.
Thank you. Well, I mean, I just had a meeting with Michael yesterday, and that model is full of assumption, as it has to be, and there's a lot of detail in the thing, and I hope we've got, more than one guy knows the recipe.
It's like any part of council. There are areas of council where risk. We understand that risk, and I think for councillors, the key thing is that we've identified it. We're going through a process, and we've got very clear ideas as to how we can mitigate that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes, Councillor Paulside.
Just a couple of questions. Look, I'm just interested to know historically which entities have followed through with a legal challenge. There have been a number of submissions suggesting that a legal challenge would be made, and some of those were contradictory from what I recall. So just trying to have an understanding of how real these threats are, I suppose.
We've had none to date. None to date. No legal challenge to that.
Secondly, what's the purpose of the working group? I know it's written down here, but I still don't have an understanding of what it's for. I mean, it's not to affect any policy, because the policy will going according to plan today, will be adopted. So what's this working group going to do?
A number of purposes. I think the first is a forum for discussion and understanding of the various issues that the development community have raised through their submissions. An education component to help both parties understand each other's positions. A number of the submission matters that are raised, we believe, through greater discussion and investigation and working them through, what they're actually describing and the actual issue are quite different. So it's a matter of actually really drilling down into those. And I guess ultimately it may be identifying some alternative options or matters for consideration for council to think about and to determine whether they wish to explore those further in subsequent reviews of the policy. So first and foremost, it's a forum for discussion between council and the development community in a very detailed way to work through things such as the model, transparency, their issues, their submission matters, other councils' practices to development contributions, a range of issues that continue to get raised through submission after submission.
Okay, so just so that I understand that. So it's obviously the framework will have been set, so it's an opportunity to perhaps be a little bit more flexible about the way council reacts or applies. Is that correct?
That's a possible outcome. I think there are many outcomes from that process. I think the very first of those is for each party to really understand deeply the issues that are being raised and the contra points and to work those through with the help of an independent facilitator to really nut down what are the core issues that appear to be or that are being raised, and are they really issues, and if they are issues, how do other councils look at those and what are options around potentially going forward to try and find a path to correct some of those issues. And I guess to be careful here, some of those issues may never be solved.
Yeah. I understand that. Do other councils, do we know, do they operate with a similar kind of working group model?
I think other councils do have good, close relationships with the development community. So this, whether they use a working model such as this, but they do certainly have forums for engagement or other means of trying to get a feel from the development community as to how their development policies are working.
So have we had anything like this in the past at council?
When we conducted the 2013 policy review, as part of that process, we had a number of stakeholder sessions when what I would refer to as pre-engagement, where we tested some elements of our policy drafts, and we had some workshops and we had some presentations and engagement sessions prior to coming to council. So probably not quite as in depth as this, but certainly we had what I would refer to as pre-engagement sessions as we work that policy up.
Yeah, I think I remember some of those sessions. So historically we haven't had this close relationship with the development community, is that correct?
I think we have had probably not in this form.
Yeah.
No. We have a number of different meetings or forums or opportunities to come together, but probably nothing with this much of a targeted focus on the particular matters here in terms of growth and DC policy.
And how long do you envisage this working group to?
Well, the time frame identifies that it runs through to April next year for the first two phases, and it could take a period of time beyond that as well. One of the things that when we've spoken with the Property Council, about this at length, they have said to us they don't want to rush this process. They want to go through it methodically and slowly, that their members are very busy doing what they do, and they want to have a chance to really spend time in getting down to the detail, working through the issues and really understand them. So my identification through this paper here shows that the first two phases are through to April next year. We'll be reporting to the S&P committee through that process, and any matters that council then wish to pursue through policy review will take as long as it needs to take to actually work those subsequent changes up. So it could be 12 months from now. It could be longer, it could be less. It just depends on the nature of what comes out of that process.
Absolutely, understand. And look, lastly, I understand that a facilitator or a quality facilitator would be pretty important to the success of this group. So that person comes at a cost. What sort of budget is that facilitator going to be?
We haven't assessed that at this stage, but we're confident that within existing budgets that we can meet that cost. But I think it's fair to say that, this particular process will have some costs in regards to the facilitator. There will be some legal advice required. I expect that some of the council professional advisors, such as our professional economist, who has been an advisor with us since day one, will be required through this process. Part of this, I think, is also going to be, at stages, potentially getting our experts and the development community experts together, having some discussions, because it's often a case of he said, they said, and never the twain shall meet. So part of this objective here is to potentially try and get some greater common understanding of certain issues and approaches.
Very good, thanks.
Councillor Gallagher?
If you've got, I can see the need for, combination of our staff and elected members. Talk about, if we've got enough elected members later, but, and you've got the independent expert in DCs. Should there be any sort of third-party contributions to this working group? And I'm just trying to think of people who may sort of have expertise but are not, quote, developers.
Like who would those be, Councillor Gallagher? Like, just to give an example, like whom?
Well, I mean, you might have, say, someone from the university who has expertise, or I'm thinking of the people that provided expertise for the Shand report. People have got, some national track record or whatever. I don't know. It's just honestly an exploratory type of question.
Yeah,
An independent planner or someone like that would be the...
I think if you look at the terms of reference, councillors, there, we note that a technical support group of advisors should be available to provide advice to the working group. So I would potentially see that.
Sorry,
as
where are the terms of reference?
They are.
Because they're not in this report, but it does say they're attached.
They're in a. They're in the separately.
Yeah, they're in the separate volume.
I mean,
They were separately circulated.
Page 3.
Well, it would have helped to have had the reference in here as to where they were set. Which document?
I'm just trying to see. That's an interesting. Let's say
Item 6.
you've got the group, but is there any sort of ground for having someone who's not associated with Hamilton? I think Councillor Mallett talked about a quote independent planner, someone that might bring a fresh set of eyes at the sort of in the group as against technical support. And I'm just trying to think if we've got, for example, examples of someone who's obviously got their head across, and I'm sure there is. What's been trending, throughout.
So our view is that the facilitator will bring many of those skills to the table.
Right.
That person will be either an RMA or a DC commissioner. So there is a panel of commissioners who are identified through the Local Government Act process as being qualified to sit across development contributions hearings or RMA commissioners. So we see someone with that skill set who's independent, who has that wider understanding, would be the ideal facilitator to this group to bring that skill set you refer to.
Yeah, but a facilitator is got a job that brings people out, stops individuals dominating, all of that stuff. And I'm just trying to think of if there's merit in having someone who is totally detached from our city sitting around that table as an equal participant. That's all, and it's just a thought.
Yeah, look, my view would be that the technical group of advisors would be the place for that person, and that doesn't preclude any of those people coming to the table to present, to participate, to be part of any of those discussions as the working group may deem appropriate.
Is there any other sort of just from local authority, is there a good model of process that we've looked at? I mean, obviously you have in making this suggestion.
We have, when we've worked this terms of reference up, we've had reference to RMA type discussions or processes. And I guess the consideration always when we developed this terms of reference was that this will be a forum for discussion. Right. Be really careful to not put in the terms of reference that it's a body to make recommendations or decisions. At this stage, it's not contemplated in the terms of reference. That may be something that when the working group reports back to the S&P committee, council may wish to amend the terms of reference or give that delegation, but I think to be careful here that we don't set the working group up at this stage to try and arrive at conclusions or recommendations when we have two parties who potentially may have opposite views.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor King, then Councillor McPherson. Yes, I've got you, Councillor Mallett, but I was going to go to the other councillors because they haven't asked questions.
I think you've just touched on why we're voting on a draft. But should we really be voting in a draft policy, a draft terms of reference? Because the terms of reference should be set by council, setting clear parameters, and for us to vote on a draft.
Sorry, so maybe the report's not clear. My intention is that council is approving the terms of reference, so they're draft at the moment, but once you've approved them today, they become the terms of reference, and only council could change that terms of reference.
Yeah, it's not clear. It should be just
Yeah.
approve the drafts as the terms of
The
reference.
intention is exactly that. So
Okay.
apologies if that's not clear.
Okay.
Could we just have the page and the attachment electronically at
It
least?
says
for the
item
terms of
6, attachment 4.
Yeah,
and
I've got that,
Have
but
you
there's
got
no
that?
page.
Doesn't have a page number in the...
No,
Yeah.
unfortunately, they're all individually page numbered. So they come near the end of that.
Yeah,
Could someone assist? Have you got,
it's all right.
have you got them?
It's hard to find electronically, but
assist,
that's
please?
all right.
Sorry, councillor King, you got some other questions? No?
On paragraph 57 in item 6,
Yep.
it has the first meeting starting in July. Should it be just left open-ended with no end date? I mean, even if it's a year out, shouldn't we have some reference to when we expect it to be wound up? And I know it's not necessarily going to be a small job, but give yourself time, but put an end date on it.
My advice would be that there are 2 phases that we've identified in the terms of reference, and that there's going to be a report to S&P committee at the end of phase 1, end of phase 2. We identify phase 1 through to November, so I'd expect that there'll be a report to S&P no later than November, and I would imagine that at that stage there'll be far greater clarity on timeframes and next steps. So it's hard for us to put an end date on it because we just don't know the extent of what may come out of the process. So I think the best advice I'd give to council is we start the process in July. We have 2 phases. We'll report to S&P at the end of each phase, and each of those reports will have greater clarity as to what's the next phase and the timeframe for the next phase.
Thank you.
Okay, councillor McPherson?
One of my questions has been answered about the terms of reference, which we've now found, thank you. But the other one is in relation to recommendation 11D on page 23. The Mayor and Chairperson of Finance Committee be appointed to the working group. To me, having only 2 councillors on that, such an important one, is a little bit limiting, and I would have thought that it was useful to have also the Deputy Chair of the Finance Committee as another appropriate person on that. So I guess I'd be asking the movers if they'd be willing to accept that, and if not, I'd move an amendment, but I'd prefer that
You could move the recommendation, councillor McPherson, with that addition.
Happy to do that, Your Worship.
Okay, so I'll make note that. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, councillor Mallett, did you have any other questions?
Yeah, just clarity over what the working group's trying to do. My limited discussion with developers and the property council and whatnot is that there's a certain amount of lack of trust, and that's to do a lot of with these things are bloody complex, and trying to explain.
Complex, are they?
They're very complex, yes.
Thank you.
And because people can't understand them or can't figure out why on earth you've made that assumption but not that assumption, that raises issues. And when you're writing checks, of course, it raises very big issues. This is nothing. This is more to deal with that, isn't it?
First and foremost,
that part of it is that.
part of it is that, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think there is a lot of, well, we've seen the submissions, there are a number of points raised. When you actually sit down and talk with some of the developers around some of those submissions, actually what they're raising and what they're actually meaning are different.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of time is required here to go through and spend time and actually work through some of those very particular issues such as transparency and what does that mean? Actually explain in detail how our current policy works, the methodology, how the charge is arrived at, why the charge is that way, and out of that will come what are the real issues that have been raised. Because I think it's really, really important that we go right back down to base principles and really focus on those first and foremost before we try and jump to let's fix this problem, when there may not be a problem that needs fixing. It just may need some refinement or education
Or understanding.
understanding.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, any other questions on this? So it's been moved by councillor McPherson. Is there a seconder? And that, councillor Gallagher, and that includes in D, councillors 11D, the addition of the Deputy Chair of Finance to that working group. Right, does anyone wish to speak for or against this motion? No? Yes? Did you wish to speak, councillor?
No, sorry, Your Worship, no.
Councillor McPherson, do you wish to speak to it?
Oh, sorry, Your Worship, just a technical thing, when we're talking about that, we should just be accepting the terms of reference.
So I would suggest that the word draft comes out in C.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And E as well. So there's the word draft in C and E. Both those come out.
Right. So councillors, just so we're clear, the motion is as is set out in 11, page 23, with the removal of the word draft in C and E, and the inclusion of the Deputy Chair of the Finance Committee in D. That's been moved by councillor McPherson and seconded by councillor Gallagher. So, did you wish to speak to it, councillor McPherson? No? Any other for or against? Yes. Councillor Forsyth?
Thank you. Just very briefly, I think the establishment of this working group, which brings the development community and council, in particular council staff, as well as elected members, in the same room, with the ability to respond, to discuss, and to try and overcome some of these gaps that have been in the past is a really great thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this group deals with the tension that has historically been there. But yeah, all the best, and I'm really looking forward to some of those good results.
Okay, councillor Mallett?
Thank you. I'm supportive of the recommendation. Also, the only issue I would have is that council is a clearly defined entity, and we know who you're representing or whatnot. The development community is not, and often is in parts of the development community are in competition with each other. So just be alert that we need to be careful that the people who are representing the development community represent the whole development community. So that's just there's always going to be some tension on their side as to who they're representing.
Okay. Yes, councillor Gallagher?
So I just want to stress, I think, what councillor, and I'm sure this will be covered by what councillor Mallett has said, because what we want for this exercise to be of use to us is to make sure that we capture that variety, if you like, of views and options. And I think just going the extra mile to make sure that at the end of the exercise, no significant player in this feels that they haven't at least had an opportunity to make a contribution. And that's the only thing I'd add, and I think that'll be the task of the working group, just to ensure that when the report comes back, that you have captured, the range of views on this.
Okay, we're going to go to the board to vote. Councillors, on that motion. Okay, thank
Carried
you.
unanimously.
Thank you very much,
Thank you,
Leon
councillor.
Green. Okay, next item is item 7, page 28. This is the adoption of the 10-year plan.
I'm going to introduce the report, Your Worship. Good morning, councillors. This is the report to adopt the 10-year plan. Today's meeting represents the end of a very long and comprehensive process. We started this journey on the 10-year plan with the council in August last year. So it has been one of the recurring themes for a significant period of time. There have been a number of briefings held, as well as a number of council meetings. And if you recall, in December, we went back at the request of council to have another robust look at the plan, and came back, and a meeting was held in February to reflect that as well. Today is the 30th of June, and from a statute, I aren't the town crier, Councillor. I was about to make a further statement, but thank you. It is the 30th of June, and statutorily we need to adopt the 10-year plan today to comply with the Local Government Act. It is in front of you, and I'm comfortable together with the team to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Any questions, councillors? No? Okay, I'll move the recommendation on page 29, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any councillors wish to speak for or against? Yes, Councillor King.
Mayor Julie Hardacre said in her election advertising that debt had been capped at $440 million. The Deputy Mayor, Gordon Chesterman, said in his election campaign, "We've slashed debt in the 10-year plan from $833 million to $430 million. We were elected by telling voters that we would hold debt at below $440 million. And we've done extremely well in achieving an even better result than that for our ratepayers. Now, 18 months later, we're about to vote to increase city debt by $100 million above today's debt levels. There are some in this room who went through a similar process as this and voted for Claudelands and for the V8 street racing debacle. In fact, it was less than 4 years ago that our Deputy Mayor Gordon Chesterman apologised to this city, ratepayers, for the poor governance of the V8 street racing event.
Point of order, Your Worship.
What is the point of order?
It was correcting the statement that I apologised. I apologised on behalf of council to the city, and that is a very clear difference. I was asked by the council to express that apology to the city.
Okay, so that's a point of order in relation to misrepresentation of a statement. Yep. Okay. My recollection is that is correct. The Deputy Mayor was asked on behalf of the council to make that statement. So, Councillor King, can you move on, please?
Don't have to accept it, just move on.
Are you intending to carry on with your submission, or your speech in relation to the motion?
Would you like me to reread what I said, reread what I said?
What I'm saying is
so
that
you can...
the matter that the Deputy Mayor raised, he is correct. He was asked to issue an apology on behalf of the council. So how you articulated that and what you said was incorrect. So can you move on, please,
I
with
think
what you're
that
saying?
point of information, I understood, because the Deputy Mayor at the time certainly didn't apologise for me. I understand he issued an apology on behalf of councillors
He did.
who were perceived to have been involved. So it wasn't the council, it was for councillors, as I understand it.
So I'm very happy, councillors, to take a break for an hour while that is ascertained.
Okay.
So if that is the wish of councillors, because to check the
Need an hour.
absolute accuracy word for word would require the democracy manager to find that report and check it. This is based on recollection of councillors who were present at the time. So I guess, Councillor King, in the efforts of expediency, if you would move on with what you want to say. Make an apology on behalf of...
Sorry, Your Worship, I didn't make any apology at all.
Councillor Chesterman.
Sorry, Councillor, the Deputy Mayor, sorry, made that apology on behalf of councillors.
That's exactly what I said.
Okay. All right, so if that's exactly what you said, I thought you were singling him out as making an apology on behalf of himself.
He made the apology. I said...
On behalf of...
I said Deputy Mayor Gordon... I said Deputy Mayor Gordon Chesterman apologised to the city's ratepayers.
Is that he made that personally, and in fact he didn't make it just for himself, he made it on behalf of councillors. So that is the issue,
Your
Councillor.
Worship,
So I'm just speaking to
Yeah.
Councillor King at the
Okay.
moment.
I said Deputy Mayor Gordon Chesterman apologised to the city's ratepayers.
Okay, so
And he did apologise to the city's ratepayers.
so Democracy Manager, I'm going to need you to check some information. So councillors will need to adjourn so that I can deal with this point of order while the information is ascertained. So let's say, I mean, I said an hour. How long do you think it will take for you to get the information? What we need is, because I believe it was from a council resolution.
Recall it.
It was before your time. Yeah. So it'll be 2011, 12, somewhere around there.
I doubt whether there would be recordings easily available for 2010 and 11.
It'll be, I'm pretty sure there'll be a council resolution.
A resolution
of some
of
sort. Was
council.
that your recollection, Deputy Mayor?
My simple recollection was that I was apologising on behalf of the council.
Well, that's not my recollection, which is...
No, so we need to check this.
It doesn't matter who I said he apologised. I don't have to say Gordon apologised is what I said. Whether he apologised for all of Hamilton, for this council or staff, he apologised. And that was my point, and that's what I said, and those are the words I used. I said, Gordon Chesterman apologised.
And I think, Councillor King, the point of order raised by the Deputy Mayor is he takes that statement to mean him personally on behalf of himself. And I am now required to make a decision about whether what you said does imply that, whether you intend it to or not. That's what I've got to decide. Now, because there's disagreement about that, I need to be able to check the accuracy of what happened at that time, and that's going to require the Democracy Manager to seek out information to assist. And that's where we're at right now. So the options moving forward are you agree to reword or withdraw that comment and carry on, or the Deputy Mayor withdraws his point.
Gordon's implying by this point of order that he didn't apologise from himself. It wasn't you're not sorry for what you did, Gordon.
Look, I'm not here to be interrogated by Councillor King. He is aware right now that he and I are in dispute over a code of conduct, and I think his behaviour this morning is making that code of conduct complaint worse.
Thank you.
Point of order, Your Worship.
I'm dealing with this point of order at the moment.
Okay, I'll
Councillor
wait.
King, the issue here is a point of order has been raised about the way you have phrased that sentence and what conclusions a person listening to that would draw. And in this need staff to go and find that and see what we can find, and that will take some time. I don't know how long, but I'm surmising. A way forward is for you to rephrase or the withdrawal of the point of order.
Whether Councillor McPherson, sorry,
What did I do?
whether Deputy Mayor Gordon Chesterman was apologising for himself or for a group of people, he apologised. And my wording was Gordon Chesterman apologised.
Yes, Councillor King, I hear what you're saying.
Very simple.
And that's your view, but I need to determine this, and I was happy to do it on recollection basis, but that seemed to upset several councillors and they wanted more accuracy on it. So the only way to get the accuracy is to get the information of the day. It's up to you guys.
Deputy Mayor Gordon Chesterman apologising?
My recollection is that he did that on behalf of councillors or council, and that is the point that he has raised in his point of order. Now, I can determine that right now, but my concern is that then everyone puts their hand up and wants to have two bulbs worth at it. So one way in which I can accurately do this is to get the information of the day.
Your Worship, I have very clear recollection of this. Councillor Chesterman apologised on behalf of council Some councillors chose not to be part of it. However, in Councillor Chesterman's apology, on behalf of us, he himself as an individual councillor was apologising because he was one of those who chose to participate. There were other councillors who chose not to be encapsulated in his apology on behalf of those councillors who chose to. So, with all due respect, Councillor Chesterman did apologise on behalf of those councillors who chose to apologise, of which he was one of.
Yeah, no, Councillor Wilson, that's my recollection too. And the point of order raised by the Deputy Mayor is that the statement made by Councillor King gives the impression that it was him alone, and that is the point he's raising. My recollection is the same as yours, and a way to resolve this without us having to wait while the accurate information is obtained is for Councillor King to recognise that in his statement. So we're in your hands, Councillor King. If you add the clarity in your words, then we can move on.
Your words are accurate.
So you're going to do that?
Once again, Deputy Mayor Gordon Chesterman apologised to the ratepayers for the poor performance of the V8s.
Okay, so we're going to adjourn, councillors, and let's take 15 minutes and we'll see what we can find. And we can have a morning tea break at the same time.